Welcome to the Normal Not Normal podcast with me, Oliver Phelps.
And me, James Phelps.
And guys, in this series, we are talking to some of our favourite people, finding out what normal means to them. And really, does normal even exist?
That's right, and I'm very excited today because this is episode 2 of the new season. Thank you so much for the great response for last week. It was a great little episode, and I really enjoyed that we're now going to do every other week. We're going to get stories from you guys in as well, and just have a random chit-chat, listen to your stories, your did you knows, everything like that. So thank you so much for sending them in, and send them in for next week. Email address is normalnotnormalpodcast@gmail.com. Send them in, and we'll make sure to get you on the show.
Exactly that. Now, today's guest is the award-winning children's author Jacqueline Wilson. Her books have helped shape the childhood of millions and millions of people all over the world, including my own. And you might also have seen the TV adaptation of her work, the long-running show on BBC television, Tracy Beaker. Now, just a disclaimer, we did record this a couple of weeks ago, hence why maybe we're wearing different clothes if you're watching, and James's hair is slightly different now.
Yes, I was actually in Scotland on a bit of a golfing trip, so I'm in the hotel. So if you hear the random lawnmower go past or something, that is why. But I was so excited, and I know Oliver was as well, that we got to speak to Jacqueline Wilson, because I remember reading Tracy Beaker, which then went on to be a hit TV series, Double Act, which was a huge book, obviously because it's about twins, which means a lot to us. The Suitcase Kid, which I still remember to this day. Many others that she's written. She's written more than 100 books. One of the most influential authors of, I'd say, the 20th century, got to be said. So we're so thankful to have her on the show.
And Jacqueline's books are known for tackling big issues like divorce, adoption, drug and alcohol abuse, poverty, and many more topics like that. But she manages to create a safe space to explore these issues, especially if you think at the end of the day they are children's books.
Very much so. It was. When reading it as a kid, they were kind of like the in-between books, weren't they? They were kind of like the Potters of the day. Obviously not about magic, but the way they were written and that kind of stuff. So if you've never read a Jacqueline Wilson book, I definitely recommend picking one of them up and just giving it a go, because they are so easy. In fact, she's rewritten The Railway Children recently, so give that a look in as well. So without any further ado, here is Jacqueline Wilson. Thank you so much for joining us this week. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Good to talk to both of you.
You too. I mean, Jacqueline, I've got to be honest with you, I suppose not just James myself, but many of us grew up with obviously Tracy Beaker and lots of other books that you've done, and I suppose also watching the BBC TV series adaptation of Tracy Beaker, which, funny enough, one of our best mates, Luke Youngblood, played Ben in the original series.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so he was doing that while we were doing the second Potter, I think it was. So he was on that there. But I saw recently as well how it was re-released on iPlayer and has broken all sorts of streaming records, because obviously it's loved by parents now, and obviously they're introducing it to their kids,
which is wonderful for me. And
yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Also, I wrote 2 books about Tracy grown up with a daughter of her own, and so they're doing a sort of My Mum Tracy Beaker lovely series with the very grown-up Danny and Montana, who played Justine Littlewood, and several other brilliant actresses. And it's very rare that you get a television programme that can actually have little flashbacks of footage 25 years ago when the main characters were little kids, and I just think it's great fun to watch.
In terms of both obviously the newer series but also as well the original, did you have any say in the casting or how the story progression went at all?
I never have anything to do with the casting. Would that I did. In all the various adaptations I've had of my books, I've always begged to be in the corner when somebody is organising casting, because I'd love to see how it goes. I'd love to see how all the children perform. I've promised I would even sort of pretend to be somebody else, but no, they won't let me. I don't know whether I'd put everybody off or what. So I didn't know at all who was going to be in the cast, but I got to invited when they were filming the first series, and there were a whole lot of kids running around when I got there, not only the main cast but a whole load of extras, and so it's a sea of children, and the director said, okay, pick out the one that's your Tracy. And I didn't know if they were going to stick to the way Tracy looks in the books or what. So I didn't have a clue. But I just looked round, and there was this young girl with attitude, with her hands on her hips. And I thought, oh, that has to be Tracy. And it was. And, you know, I was just taken aback by Danny's just absolute nailing that part completely. And it's so interesting that she's turned out to be, you know, a really brilliant actress who, you know, has taken the grown-up Tracy and actually run with it. I feel a little sorry for Danny, because it must be very, very difficult if she's going for other parts of things. People say, oh yes, Tracy Beaker, and putting her in a certain slot. I mean, it must happen to so many actors if they're really distinct in a part. But I must admit, I'm very glad for me. This is great. But as to the way that the series has gone, I mean, originally with the very first Tracy Beakers, they stuck more or less to the plot. But I mean, you couldn't possibly have just, I think there were 5 of the original series, and then Tracy Beaker Returns and all sorts of spin-offs and everything. Completely new territory. They always run the scripts past me if ever there's anything I don't like, and it's very, very rare that I will object to anything at all. You know, I'm free to say, look, I don't really think that works or whatever, but I rarely do. And I do understand that it's always going to be just a little bit broader than in the books, because in the books, you know what people are doing inside their heads. But unless you have permanent voiceovers, which would be very strange, you can't do that. And you want lots more action and funny bits and everything. And, you know, I think they've done a really great job. And then for my mum, Tracy Beaker, I had the advantage of the main scriptwriter, Emma Reeves, having become a friend of mine, because she's adapted so many different things. And she is extra specially wonderfully respectful, and will always email me, what do you think about this, and I'm a bit worried, would you mind awfully if we did that? And so I just feel so lucky. I could just sit back and relax. And then sometimes children who don't understand the way things work feel that I personally am not only writing every single script, but directing it too, sorting it all out. And I get congratulated when all I've done is written a book originally, and that's that. So I've been very, very lucky.
You mentioned there your My Mum, Tracy Beaker, which you wrote in 2018, and then obviously has gone on to be a great show as well. What was it like making an older version of the character? Because I can't imagine there's many authors get the opportunity to go back to an original character and then thinking where they are, what are they doing now? Like, how was that? Was it quite moving for you in a way?
I love doing it, and I wanted Tracy, most importantly, to become a good mum, because so many people think that if you've been brought up in care, you haven't been adequately parented yourself. That is going to be a repeating pattern, and that's absolutely not the case. I've known many people who've grown up in care because inevitably I've been involved with various different foster care associations and meeting young people in care simply because of writing Tracy Beaker. And often, if you haven't had a great parent yourself, or somebody that you could always rely on, it makes you even more determined to be a good parent yourself. And so I knew that Tracy would still have a few anger issues, say, but never would she, shout and scream at her own daughter. And, Jess is her world. I was tempted in some ways to make Tracy a huge professional success, but I didn't think it would be necessarily realistic. I have had a lot of conversation, particularly with a leaving care group in Scotland, who, after I'd done an event up in Edinburgh, I think it was, we got together and discussed things, and they actually introduced me to a visiting American care leaver who is now training to go up in space, unbelievably. And I can see that people can do amazing things, but I thought the average care leaver, particularly one like Tracy, who doesn't buckle down at school and left school early, it would be a bit unlikely. So I wanted her to be a fantastic parent first, and then as the story progresses, Tracy comes into her own, and she's a very bright girl, and she's becoming an expert now in the whole antiques business, and having fun too. So I thought this is a happy compromise.
Yeah, as you say, I suppose it's keeping that level of realism to it as well. So as you say,
exactly, and it's difficult because each person who's been in care watches or reads wanting their own experience reflected back, and you can't actually make it everybody's experience. And I don't generally talk to people asking them exactly about what's happened to them or whatever, because to start with, I don't feel I should be intrusive or use somebody else's real life, but also I've got to let my imagination work and see what will work best on the page or inevitably on the screen. So it's difficult, and also I think, talking very generally, up to a certain age, some of the children that I've met have such desperate needs to see their mums in particular, and can't always do that and don't let go of the idea. But then after 11, 12, then, I mean, everybody suddenly becomes an angry teenager and feels it's not fair and is a bit anti-authority. And I think then is the time when people start to get cross with the system, sometimes with absolute justification, and have much fearsome or angry ideas, until hopefully they can work through that. And it is awful because, try as people might, it's harder when you get to be in your teens if you haven't found, a wonderful forever foster home for you. And it's very difficult. But there are some amazing success stories out there. And my daughter, who's an academic, recently was teaching a most brilliant care leaver who has actually written a story about herself, and I know people are very interested in it, so who knows, a real life Tracy Beaker might actually get a proper bestseller at some stage, which would be wonderful.
I think as well it's that, obviously, keeping that level of expectation as well for people, and also people want to see some of their own environments, to say, reflected in the story. So I mean, like, you've never really run away or shied away from exploring like tougher parts in your books. Like, I think a lot of writers would think twice about having a character whose parents had passed away, or as you said, like even like adoption, addiction issues, mental health problems, all that type of thing. 'Cause there's almost a case where children and young adults books should be a safe space. But I'm sure many of our listeners have found a lot of comfort in your writing, where it doesn't shy away from that. If anything,
you see,
sometimes it may be like the first. To like someone in a very sheltered upbringing, shall we say, it may be the first time they'll be aware of it, and yet other people will read it and think, oh, that stuff happens as well.
I think that's a very good point to make, because we're all so different and had such different upbringings. I try and always make it from the child's point of view and in the first person, so you don't. I keep out any really upsetting details, so that if you're a child who's gone through something terrible, you might get a hint or two, yes. But if you're not, doesn't occur at all. And I try and have a lot of humour in my books. I mean, to start with, I think having a sense of humour, even a very black sense of humour, helps you get through really difficult times anyway. And I censor myself. And nowadays, too, publishers actually send your work after it's been edited and copy edited to special agencies that, are sort of looking for anything that might upset anybody at all. So by the time things reach print and you've got a nice new shiny book, hopefully you might make children think sometimes, and you might make them hopefully feel, gosh, yeah, I could be a bit angry, or I could be a bit mouthy if I had to put up with that situation. But I don't think there's anything really to upset anybody desperately. So, I mean, in all the many years I've been writing, I've had one letter complaining that somebody, from a child, saying she didn't like it and it made her unhappy, whichever book it was. And I've had about a handful of parents complaining about this or that. But for the vast majority, I've just had nothing but, thank you so much for writing about this subject or that subject. But weirdly, in schools, sometimes they're very into genres. And my books, would you believe, nearly always end up as humour. Which, if you praise each of my books, they certainly sound very dour and grim.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, if you crack a few jokes and have a few silly things, I think a child reader, it breaks the tension if they're worrying about something. And as far as I can remember, truthfully, I've never had a character actually take drugs. They might be aware of drugs, but they don't take drugs. There's no sort of explicit sexual scene, or even there might be something implied that some older teenagers might be up to, but absolutely nothing that would make even the most old-fashioned parent blanch, as far as I'm aware.
So I noticed, like when you're saying, so I was reading the my mum Tracy Beaker the other day, and like you said, it's just how when she describes it as a palace, and then obviously Tracy's saying it's not, but it's, and you talk about the graffiti and the litter around, which is what it's not sugarcoating it like any you would think children books to be like, and I think that's what especially when I was a child reading your work, I related to it a lot. I trusted it a lot. I trusted the story a lot more because it's a lot more believable. And obviously, like we said, we've read quite a few of your books. Tracy Beaker, obviously, double act, obviously being twins, really like that one.
Now, did I get it right about twins? I mean,
I think for the most part, yeah, definitely.
Good.
There's the how can we put it? There's the license to do naughty things and try and get away with it. So,
I mean, I think that's
which
every
never stops.
singleton's dream to be able to do
so.
that.
Not to the degree that those guys got up to. We never got up to that much trouble, but we definitely had times where we liked to have fun. But I always remember the one book which I still think about quite often actually is The Suitcase Kid. And I remember when we first read that in primary school, and the whole class has to read a little bit and go from there. And first of all, I used to hate reading out loud.
Oh, it's so nerve-wracking, isn't it?
I know, it's like a torturous thing to do, but I remember when reading that in school, it was the first book I took home to read. I wanted to finish the story before everybody else because I enjoyed it so much. And although I couldn't really relate to Andy, the main character, in regards to, like, my parents weren't divorced or getting divorced or anything like that, but it definitely helped me understand friends whose parents had got divorced or something, because it's not, as a kid, it's hard to understand what's going on with other people. Do you think that when you write a story, are you doing it just to tell a story, or is there always some way of you want to help people understand the situation or let people know that they're not the first person to go through it and you are okay?
I think first of all, I want to give somebody a good read that they'll like to read and it isn't too boring. But I want, when I'm going through a really sad time, say, I'm not really into those actual self-help books, but I love to read about somebody going through a divorce or something like that, if that's what was happening to me at the time. And so, because it makes you feel you're not alone, because when you're with friends, unless they're very, very close friends, you never really know exactly how they're feeling or what exactly is on their mind. And so, I've always turned to books, and I wanted to show children that they aren't alone, or if they're having a lovely time, some other children might be having a problem or two. And I got the idea of the Suitcase Kid because I was talking to a mum outside the school while we were waiting to pick up our daughters, and I knew that she and her husband were splitting up, and I said, "How's it going?" And she was saying, "Oh, it's awful." She said, "But the wonderful thing is, so-and-so," her daughter said, "hasn't got a clue, happy as Larry." And I actually knew that she'd been telling my daughter all sorts of sad things and how worried she was, and she couldn't sleep at night. And I think I wanted to show children that they might be pretending rather valiantly to mum or dad that, things are fine, but actually it is upsetting. And more than anything else, I didn't want the story to end with mum and dad getting back together again, because generally when there's been a big breakup, you don't get back together again, and certainly not because some child has done some valiant thing to get you together. I wanted to show that yes, it hurts, and you're always going to wish your parents were together, but you can get through it, and find that you can manage with two families if that's the way it pans out. You can find other adults to relate to, you can make new friends, and that it isn't, the awful thing is children don't have any perspective. If they're really hurting now, they have no idea that in a year's time they might feel a lot better, because a year seems so far away. For me, a year goes whiz, just like that. But so I wanted to be reassuring, but also to tell an interesting story.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you say that, because literally just yesterday I was meeting up with a friend of mine who's got a daughter who's 10, and she was explaining to me that her best mate at school, her mum and dad broke up, and they just didn't. One day it was just like, right, your dad's leaving, and they never addressed it with her. But so her friend told my mate's daughter that was the output for it. And it's amazing, as you said, how people don't necessarily address it. But if they can find solace in a book, I'll call my mate and say, actually, I've got a great idea.
It's funny how the Suitcase Kid, and I wrote it quite a while ago, but I think teachers do use it, because appallingly now, couples splitting up is so much more an ordinary occurrence. And I would say that in a class of kids, there will be quite a few that have experienced this. And so it is a way of, without being too heavy-handed, kind of dealing with it as, yes, this is something that's happened. Yes, this is sad, but mostly you get over it, which, I think is a good message.
Definitely. Yeah, and yeah. I don't want to steal on, but I say as a book, it's something which I always remember bits of and think of. I always remember the line where she says, like, obviously parents row, but this was more than, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but this is more than normal rowing.
Yes.
I remember thinking, wow, all parents have a little row every so often. I didn't know that. I just assumed that everybody was like, it was just my mum and dad behind the doors. But then it was just something which really, just to be clear, everybody, they don't row all the time. Like they're still together. But it's
especially now we've left home. Yeah.
Yeah. But it just little things like that, and I think that's what's great about a lot of your writing, is that it's kind of that. How can I describe it? it's that, trust me, we know what you're going through, and this is normal.
Yeah, I find it really interesting though that now I get a lot of emails from people kind of your age, and but it's as if I'm some kind of agony aunt, and they tell me about some problem in their lives, and I feel tremendously flattered. But you see, in fiction, you can have a problem and then you can be Mrs. Magic and solve it for your characters.
Yeah.
But in real life, I haven't got a clue what to advise anybody. My own life has been a bit sort of up and down anyway. So it's just, well, it's a compliment, I think, and it's lovely that people could have read my books and then sort of forgotten all about them. And then sometimes, if you're leaving home or you go up in the attic or something and you find a sort of packing box full of old books, it does bring back that nostalgic feel. So, which works for me because, sometimes I've had often friends of somebody that grew up liking my books and then, gave them to an Oxfam shop or something, said, could you tell me, is such and such still in print? Can I get her a copy? And if I can I send it to you and you sign it? Which I think is a smashing thing to do.
Oh, amazing. So, I mean, going back a bit, I know we touched on it earlier, but obviously with Tracy Beaker and how obviously revisiting the character and revisiting the story on the TV as well may have been a chance to set some things right, because I know there was a story that a couple of members in the cast were annoyed when Cam got married to a man when the character was gay, but then in the most recent series, my mum Tracy Beaker, all's put right when she's married to a woman. So obviously not only is that a massive roller coaster to be going on, but what was that like for you being probably seen inadvertently in the middle of?
I found it really quite interesting. I had always imagined Cam being gay, but bearing in mind that the story of Tracy Beaker came out, I think, 30 years ago, maybe even 31 years ago. The television series came out about 5 years later. Generally speaking, you didn't really talk about gay couples in books then, whereas I think a whole generation on, we're much more cool about same-sex partnerships, and so I kind of hinted here and there, but didn't do anything about it. And then I think it was interesting with the television adaptation at that time suddenly to have Cam being married, but to a man, but then there was a discussion afterwards and they thought, no, I don't really think this is working, and maybe they didn't have the right storylines or whatever. And so there was apparently a little discussion about, well, what are we going to do then? And they dealt with it. And just for the next series, and it was just so snappy, and that somebody said to Cam, what about so-and-so, whatever he's called, and he just, history. And that was it. No long-winded explanation. And I thought, that's the way to deal with things.
Definitely. But, I mean, as you said, though, like, even, 25, 30 years ago, that wasn't a big... It was still a taboo subject, wasn't it? That,
I
two people
think
of the same sex would be in a relationship.
I mean... I don't know. There were, in the soaps, I think they'd started dealing with sort of gay attraction, stuff like that. But it was always a kind of, this is what it's all about, rather than, this is just a fact of life, so-and-so lives with so-and-so, or whatever. And I think... I have to keep reminding myself, because as you get older and things unsettle you and you don't know how to use, say, modern technology or whatever, you kind of think back to the good old days. But actually they weren't really that great. Particularly, I think young people now are much more open-minded, much more relaxed about an awful lot of things. So I think that, is a great leap forward.
Just sticking with that slightly, when you wrote Love Frankie, which was a book that included a gay relationship,
yeah,
and then it made people look at your own relationship with your partner Trish, which
I
you've been
knew
with for
that
18
would
years.
be inevitable.
Do you mind if I asked you about
No,
this?
no.
What was like? Was that strange for you, for people like making it a big story?
Well, I was quite surprised, but also knew that papers, particularly the more ones that just want your personal story or whatever, would probably ask all sorts of questions. And so it was decided, right, pick your journalist and the newspaper that you want to give a proper interview, a long, lengthy interview with. And then, if you don't want to talk to anybody else afterwards, you can just say, look, I've dealt with this issue, it's not history. And it was just lovely. As far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm not personally on Twitter. I mean, there's fans of Jacqueline Wilson on Twitter, but I'm not. So I have no idea if people protected me from people saying shock horror, how can you say this, or not, who knows. But certainly it was very easy for me. And also I kind of almost have joined a trend without realising it, because I was married to a guy for about 30 years, got married at 19, how mad is that? Wow. And I was always very open to any kind of partnership, but didn't really think, I wasn't sort of repressed or anything. But just then that marriage broke up, and then I was on my own for about 6 years, and that was okay, a bit lonely at times, but mostly okay. And then, I don't know, this is quite embarrassing, then I met Trish and I thought, oh, she's wonderful. And I mean, I didn't expect this to happen to me, but it did. And now we've been together nearly 20 years. So I like to tell any middle-aged woman who's really, particularly if her marriage has just broke up, and you might think, oh God, what am I going to do now? I'd say, just never know what's going to happen. Because I remember my 50th birthday, and I was thinking, well, everything's just going to go downhill from now. Nothing more exciting is going to happen to me. And amazing things happened. So I think, it's just a good timing for me, because I don't think, unless you are a member of a very fundamental religion, I really don't think many people would be troubled by anybody being gay or not gay or whatever. I mean, and I'm a sort of respectable old lady. I'm not really going to shock anybody, I don't think.
So when very good. Can I ask you when? So I know that a lot of people who listen to our show, they're very creative, and there's quite a few people who write or want to become writers. Could you talk us through, do you have like a set process on how you go from thinking of an idea to then putting it on page? And do you write the last scene, the last chapter first or whatever? Or do you have a set way of doing things?
I like to have not only the book that I'm currently writing, but I like to have the one that's coming after it, just some germ of an idea, so that as I'm finishing one book, and particularly while I'm rewriting it, then I can develop the next idea in my head. And so that I am a kind of a compulsive writer, in that the moment I've finished a book, the very next day I like to start a new one and just carry on like that, because I miss it so. I mean, I just feel that it's my other life, and I would feel I was only living half a life if I wasn't writing all the time. I mean, all those hours wasted standing in supermarket queues, or waiting to tell somebody something over the phone, and you just hear that awful music played again and again and again, and you are 45th in the queue, or whatever.
It's very important to us.
Yes. It gives you something to think about, and so that by the time I'm ready to write, I've got my characters in my head. I don't always plot it all out, because I find by the time I've done that, you almost think, well, I've sorted it out. What more is there to do? So I like to have my characters, have a theme, know very vaguely where I want to end up at the end of the book and what sort of book it's going to be, whether it's a quite young book for, say, 6 to 10-year-olds, or a teenage book or whatever. But then just, I think knowing the characters is the most important thing, and just see where they lead me. I mean, it's always difficult, but I rehearse in my head the first paragraph always, because that is that big, you're kind of committed to it. And I know you can just sort of press on the computer and it all blots out again. But for me, I like to start with something that will draw the attention of the reader, and hook them so they want to carry on and know what happens next. Because when I was young, a children's book would often have a very dreary first chapter telling you all about the children's grandparents or parents, or setting the whole scene. But, you know, you don't really want to plough through all that. You just want to get started with the characters and see what they're like. And so that's what I try and do.
So, I mean, I can imagine that obviously living a lot of your life, even just on paper type thing, in the shoes of a child, and create characters and stories like that. But what was your normal growing up? I know I remember reading somewhere that you started writing at 17, was it?
Yeah, I started
late
earning
teens.
my living at 17 as a writer, because that's always what I wanted to be from when I was about 6 years old. And I was forever writing in little notebooks at home. And I was an only child too, which, though I had friends at school, for whatever reason, I never was allowed to have friends back in the flat, and so I played sort of imaginary games a lot of the time, and basically that was wonderful training for being a writer. And at 16, I don't come from a posh background at all. Brought up on a council estate, and everybody just left school at 16 when they'd just done their equivalent of GCSEs. And my mum didn't want me to work in a factory or whatever, and so suggested I do a secretarial training course at the local tech. I didn't want to be a secretary, but all I wanted to do was be a writer, and so she said triumphantly, well, there, you need to type if you're going to be a writer. So I went and did the secretarial course, wasn't very good at it, but then when looking for a job, I did see this advert, wanted teenage writers, and couldn't believe it, wrote up for it, and it was the Scottish firm DC Thompson's, who were the next year bringing out a full-colour teenage magazine, eventually called Jackie. And so I wrote them a story, and to my utter astonishment, they liked it. And even more surprisingly, I hadn't even thought about this, they paid me. I mean, it was only about £3, but still it was extraordinary to me. And so I kept writing them stories, and then they offered me a job, which was up in Dundee. And I was still only 17 at that time. And so it was a bit scary deciding to go and live. I'd never even been to Scotland at that stage. But even then, I had the sense to know you only get opportunities like this occasionally. Why not go for it? And so I did. And it was fantastic training. I worked as a junior journalist on various different women's magazines. And then got married at 19, but wrote freelance, and basically I have been earning my own keep ever since 17, which had to compromise sometimes and do an awful lot of magazine stuff that I didn't really want to do when I wanted to write novels, but one way and another I kept on. I wasn't an overnight success when even my books started to get published, but eventually it was The Story of Tracy Beaker that was my kind of breakthrough book. And after that, things became much nicer.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So in your latest book, The Primrose Railway Children, which is out now, you've rewritten a classic story from the point of view of the youngest child.
That's right.
And you say that you kept in some of the grittiness instead of ending it in kind of a Enid Blyton, we all made it home for tea kind of way. What's it like to rewrite someone else's work?
I won't say it's rewriting, it's reimagining. And it was Edith Nesbit's The Railway Children, which I adored. And it's a fantastic book, and I hope my book will make some kids who read my book actually go back to the original. But reading it as an adult, a dad is sent erroneously to prison, but because he's an English gentleman, of course he couldn't possibly have done anything bad, and so it's all sorted out at the end, and the children go in so-called poverty to live with mother in the countryside where nobody knows them. But they still manage to have a reasonable lifestyle. And it tickled me that the mother in that book is so brave, so courageous. Even when they get to this cottage at night time and they hear rustling and it's rats. Well, anybody normal will go, oh my God, it's rats. But it was, oh, this is an adventure, children, etc. And so she irritated me a little bit. As an adult, not as a child, I just absorbed it all. And the story is told from the eldest girl's point of view for the most part, who is definitely mother's favourite, even though mother says she isn't. And then there's the boy, Peter, and then particularly in old-fashioned children's books, the boy was always considered special. And then the youngest daughter in the original Railway Children book, Phyllis, all Nesbit writes about her is she meant extremely well, which I always thought was...
Sounds like my school report.
Yeah, exactly. So my book is written from the point of view of the youngest child who, she has to stick up for herself because she doesn't feel that she's the favourite at all. And the person she loves more than anything is Dad. And Dad disappears, and they're not particularly, mother isn't open with the children about what's happened to Dad. But so there's this family who are a kind of, it's a darker version of the original Edwardian book, but they go to live near a vintage railway, and because you can't have modern children playing by a modern railway, it would be terrifying, and they wouldn't be allowed.
The West Coast Main Line would be a bit different, wouldn't it?
Exactly. But I think everybody likes those old steam railways, and so the kids love to go there and sort of be on the platform and get to know all the people that work the trains. And I live relatively near a wonderful Bluebell Railway, which is a fantastic concern and run extremely professionally, but often with really fantastic volunteers, and been on several train rides and loved it. And so I thought, this is a wonderful setting, and I can mirror some of the things that happened in the original book, but in a modern kind of way. So I had great fun writing this story, and I'm doing all sorts of things to do with the book to promote it, like talking to you guys, but also I'm actually going to be on a train at the Bluebell Railway, and I'm going to be talking with various kids, and then I think I'm going for another special ride, which will be great.
Brilliant.
Fantastic launch, shall we say.
Yeah,
it's certainly a bit better than just a launch on a Kindle, isn't it? Like,
exactly.
Actually do it there, and I suppose in the environment which you envisaged when you were writing it. But, so
did you write any on the Bluebell Railway?
I didn't, but I took frantic notes. And also, because I knew absolutely nothing about steam engines, I had to, I looked in, they've got a very good and comprehensive shop, but all the book specifics about steam railways are very much for very keen followers, and it could have been written in Serbo-Croat for all I could understand. So I found various children's books, the sort of Edwardian type, the boys' book of wonder railways and stuff like that. Still, it was pretty technical, and I have a horror that I might have made mistakes. But as it's written, as if a 9-year-old has written it, I feel I can pretend it's her mistakes rather than mine.
So our podcast is called, obviously, Normal, Not Normal. So a couple of questions that we always ask is, what does normal mean to you?
Normal, I've always thought that I was relatively normal, but people always fall about laughing when I say that, in that I once was with my oldest school friend and her sister, and we were looking at some jewellery, and bear in mind, I wear huge, great rings and bangles and God knows what all over the place. And in all seriousness, I said, no, I couldn't really wear that necklace, which we were looking at. I think it would be a bit too flamboyant. And they creased up laughing because I've always had my own sort of slightly distinctive way of dressing. And I've never really felt I totally fitted in with what is normal. I mean, I'm a normal human being. I worry about things. I catastrophize. If my daughter doesn't text at the usual time, I think, oh my God, what's happened to her? What are we going to give people to eat if we have invited them round to supper, and will Trish cook it, not me, sort of thing. But I don't. I mean, I was married to a policeman, and I certainly wasn't a typical policeman's wife, I don't think. I've never really been the sort of typical this or that, and it used to worry me sometimes. But now I feel actually I quite like being slightly not normal, and because it's much easier now in that things are so relaxed. I mean, you can be really whatever you want to be, particularly if you get lucky enough. I mean, I wish everybody could be actors, could be writers or whatever, and that doesn't always happen. But you're free to dream and think that this is what you can be and this is your niche in life. And there's no sort of template for the way your average normal person should be. You can sort of veer off one way or another and do whatever you want.
What is your favourite book?
My favourite book is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and definitely I would say that's a not normal book, because it's about, most people say it's about the breakdown of a college girl, and she becomes so bothered with her mental health issues. She makes a very serious suicide attempt, and then the rest of the book is about her recovering. I've recommended it to 2 different book groups, and they've admired the writing. It's wonderful, wonderful, beautiful writing, but said, oh, it's so depressing, and oh, who wants to read about people, utterly sort of behaving so weirdly and everything. And you see, for me, I didn't think she had unusually weird behaviour or anything. So I love The Bell Jar. I think it's the most fabulous book. Sylvia Plath herself, I would say mostly was not a happy girl, but and very sadly she did eventually commit suicide. But she was a wonderful poet, and I think she will always have great followers.
Did that book inspire you to in how you write in certain ways?
I think even before I'd read The Bell Jar, I read it when I was about 18, I suppose, I much preferred writing it in the first person and in a kind of colloquial way. But, her sort of metaphors and similes and the way she writes, I mean, it's with a poet's eye, but not in a kind of pretentious way, no.
What is your favourite food?
Well, last night I was at a nice arty cinema with friends, and we had a supper, and I had salad, which was delicious, and it was with sort of watermelon and pomegranates and a little bit of feta cheese, and I love that sort of food. But with it, I had a plate of chunky chips. I like that sort of food too. So it's a kind of mixture.
The yin and yang of that.
Exactly.
What is your favourite film?
I think it has to be Thelma and Louise. I just recently rewatched it. I've seen it about 5 times. And it's not, I don't hate men at all. Literally, my best friends are men. But I just love the relationship between Thelma and Louise, and I think they've got reasons for sort of hitting the road. Well, certainly they have. And
Yes.
I don't condone the violence in it, but it's a cracking film, and with the most amazing ending, and 2 actresses who were just fantastic. So I don't think it can be bettered.
No, it's certainly one of the most iconic endings, I think. Even if you haven't necessarily seen the film,
Yeah,
you'll
it's
know,
just
you'll know,
great.
you know that scene.
What is your favourite song?
There used to be a American woman singer called Dorrie Previn, who wrote, her lyrics are extraordinary, and she was very musically gifted, and it was just a wonderful combination of her beautiful voice. And I think her most famous songs is Mythical Kings and Iguanas, which, strange title, it's got a lot of meaning when you listen to it. She made about 6 albums, and all of them were absolutely brilliant. Sadly, she's dead now. She was terrified of flying, but she did come over here to Britain once and gave a series of concerts. I went to the first and I went to the last, and she was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And finally, what is your favourite quote? And that can be from a book, from a film, from anything.
Well, it's from an adaptation of my historical book, Hetty Feather. I didn't actually write it, so it's not part of my book, so I'm not being ridiculously showing off. But my Hetty meets up with this woman she'd always hoped was her mother, and she's not. But so this Madame Adeline comforts her and gives her some cake, and she says, everything's better with cake. And it's my motto too. If I'm really fed up or bored or sad, I forget healthy eating and eat a slice of cake. And you do
Everything's
cheer
better
up.
with cake.
Yeah. Words to live by with that one. I think.
Yeah.
Definitely, 100%. Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us this week. I've really, really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for all your time.
Oh, it's been great talking to you. Thrilled to be on your podcast.
I really, really enjoyed listening to that back.
Definitely. She's one of those people that you could speak to for hours, and she was so given with her time. A very, very just lovely lady. You know, when you meet someone that you've heard of all your life and they're just as nice as you hope them to be. It was so thankful. I'm so thankful for having her on. It was so enjoyable.
It was, yeah, a really inspirational chat. So hopefully there's people listening now who are thinking, you know what, I'd quite like to do a bit of writing. I've got a similar process to Jacqueline's writing process, you know, how she's literally, starts a new book when she's literally just finishing the last one, and there's just stuff always going on and on and on. But also as well on the other side of things, like talking about how she established a new life and a love life later in life, just shows that, just being comfortable who you are and doing what's good for you, is truly, truly inspiring stuff. So thank you very much, Jacqueline, for joining us today, and we really hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as we did as well. I think the cool thing was as well how she mentioned going to see Tracy Beaker, actor Danny Harmer, on set and instantly knowing that she was Tracy, which I suppose when it's coming from the person who invented it, whose brain the whole idea came from, is such a great compliment to have. So thank you so much, Jacqueline.
Before we leave,
Yeah.
I've got a couple of did you know facts.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
So I was inspired by, obviously, The Railway Children. That's one of my favourite books as a kid. So like I said, I'm really excited to read Jacqueline's version of it. But I thought I could do a couple of did you know facts about trains. That's right. Grab your bobble hat, put on, stand at the end of a platform, and train spot with me. So this is interesting.
That's like a terrible song.
Did you know the word train comes from a French verb which means to draw or drag?
Right.
There you go. Early trains once relied on gravity and rope for motion. Monorails feature a single rail and are elevated from the ground. That's what makes it a monorail. You got it?
As in The Simpsons, mono means one
And rail means rail.
Yes.
Trains are in films a lot and all that kind of stuff. So there's a fight scene in the Bond movie Skyfall, which was actually filmed on an actual moving train. Very dangerous, but it looked very cool. And my final fact is some trains have a second locomotive which pushes the train forward from the back. So there's one and another. There you are. Random train facts there. Let's get this back on track. Did you like that one? It's very good. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us this week. We had such an amazing time, and I really do hope that everybody listening was inspired by her story. If you are a writer and have even more inspiration, grab a pen and pencil, open your word processing document on your computer or phone, and just type away. Who knows what you may write today? That would be absolutely fantastic. And hey, why not send in one of your short stories to us at normalnotnormalpodcast@gmail.com. Little segue there. And also, obviously, send in your story times, of your real life story times, your questions, your did you knows. Keep sending them in, and next week we'll get them on, and hopefully we'll have a good time then.
And guys, I just want to say to you guys as well, thank you so much for listening to the Normal Not Normal podcast. Now, if you enjoyed it, give us a like, give us a follow or subscribe, and just leave us a nice review. In Train Talk, the Normal Not Normal podcast locomotive will be pulling gently into story time, your story time station, next week.
Slam dunk, are you ready?